Hey, what's up everybody? Seja here, and standing in our mugwort patch, and it is in full flower. The bees are loving it. Thought we'd come down and share a little bit about the medicinal properties of this herb. So mugwort, I love this plant. This is one of the plants, kind of one of those first plants that I really started getting interested in when I first started becoming an herbalist back, I don't know, probably, I don't even know how many years, probably close to 20 years ago, I guess. Looking at this remedy and learning about its properties, it always just kind of there's always those plants, those first plants you get to know, they always kind of, you have fond memories with them, So it's just been glorious having the mugwort in the garden, and so I'm really excited to share about it. So its Latin name is Artemisia vulgaris. Which of course Artemisia is, based on the Greek goddess Artemis, the goddess of the moon and the hunt. And we'll talk a little bit more of some of the symbolism and associations of that with this plant a little bit later. But the taste of this plant is, it's a really cool taste because it's a combination of two key tastes in herbal medicine. On the one hand, this is definitely bitter. Quite bitter, not quite as bitter as many other artemisias like wormwood or sweet Annie, but it is definitely distinctly bitter, while at the same time it's pungent and aromatic. So this is a combination of tastes that is really, really useful and lends to some really interesting properties. David Winston refers to them as fragrant bitters. Other herbalists might call them just aromatic bitters. I tend to just call them aromatic bitters. But what's cool about that is that you have these two actions coming together, whereas pungent aromatic plants typically tend to be warming, stimulating to circulation and blood flow. They tend to warm you up, and they tend to stimulate digestion as like a carminative. And at the same time, a bitter herb is typically quite cooling and stimulating to digestion in a totally different way. Now, when you combine an aromatic and a bitter in one plant, I always like to say it's like a formula unto itself, right? It's like combining a carminative and a bitter, usually like two separate herbs, but you have it together as one. And so these two tastes combine in a really unique way here in mugwort that lends it some really unique properties. So in terms of its affinities, like where in the body this herb is going to have its effect, of course the digestive system is really, really key for this herb. This is a great digestive remedy for the reasons I just expressed, right? It's a fragrant bitter. It's combining the carminative and bitter tonic properties together. So it's stimulating digestion really from top down, like the whole digestive system is being stimulated. It's going to have a bit of affinity for the liver and the gallbladder because it's so bitter. Now, it's not, as I said, as bitter as, say, its cousin wormwood. So wormwood definitely has a much stronger impact on the liver and the gallbladder, but mugwort definitely will still have some properties there. Other main affinity that this herb has is for the nervous system. This is a great plant in the way that, Matthew Wood refers to it as a nervine stimulant, that it actually does stimulate the nerves, but it's a tricky way of talking about an herb, because when you say a nerve stimulant, immediately people will think of like caffeine containing plants, like, oh, is it going to make me jittery? So when we're talking about stimulation to the nervous system, that doesn't always mean it's giving you energy like a caffeine containing plant. What that means is it's stimulating nerve activity, like when a nerve becomes deadened in its response, or it's not firing as well as it should. Perhaps the nerve has been injured. Perhaps the nerve needs more blood supply, nutrition. A nerve stimulant is used. I mean, another great example of a nerve stimulant would be something like rosemary, right? Certainly rosemary is not caffeine stimulating, but it does, when you take it, you kind of like feel a little more, like it kind of perks you up, it wakes you up a little bit, right? But yeah, again, but not in like a caffeine containing way. So So the digestive system, the nervous system, whenever I see those two affinities combined, my mind immediately goes to those types of nervous digestive complaints, digestive cramping, digestive spasm, people with digestive symptoms associated with some sort of nervous type complaint. The other key organ system here for mugwort is the female anatomical reproductive system. So this is classically considered a great remedy for women and many of the physiological complaints that they can deal with. So this is a great plant for a wide variety of those different stages of life. So those are kind of the main affinities that I tend to think of with mugwort. And moving into the core action. So certainly, as I mentioned, as a bitter tonic, as a bitter tasting herb, it has the bitter tonic action. As an aromatic fragrant plant, it has some carminative properties. As a bitter tonic, it will also lend itself, I would say, a relatively mild cholagogue choleretic property, meaning it's going to increase the production of bile in the liver. That's choleretic. And it will increase bile secretions by the gallbladder, which is cholagogue. And then we have the nervine property. So mugwort's cool because on the one hand, it is a nervine stimulant, like I said. So it is going to help kind of stimulate and kind of bring life to the nervous system. But at the same time, it is also a nervine sedative. So it is really, really great for gently calming and sedating nervous system complaints, nervousness, anxiety, tension. It's a really great remedy for folks that have difficult time sleeping. Although, this herb is really renowned in its association with sleep, but also with dreams. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, mugwort's nice because it can help you fall asleep, but for some people, it stimulates dreaming so much that you kind of wake up in the morning and you're like, that was a busy night. Like I slept all night, but I was dreaming so much, I still feel kind of tired. So you kind of have to be a little bit aware of that. But this herb is used very commonly in British herbal medicine as a nervine and to help with sleep and things like that. It is also a really great emmenagogue. So it is used to help to stimulate and bring on menses. And it's doing it, it's cool because it's doing it in two ways. Like oftentimes with emmenagogues, you'll see some emmenagogues do it because they're these warming, pungent, aromatic herbs that stimulate blood flow and circulation, right? This is how something like ginger can be an emmenagogue because it's stimulating blood flow. Other emmenagogues you'll see are really bitter. They have that bitter draining action, downward buried draining action of fluids, something like motherwort. Well, here we've got, again, an aromatic bitter. Mugwort's doing both. So as a bitter, it's draining fluids, and as an aromatic, it's stimulating blood flow and circulation. So it's a really great combination of properties here where we see it's moving a stuck, stagnant liver, which is something that can happen, very commonly associated with like PMS type symptoms can be due to a stagnation in the liver. As the hormonal levels are shifting, the liver needs to metabolize and process all those hormones, which many of which are, very large, complex molecules that are kind of difficult for the liver to break down. And so it's helping to move that kind of stuck liver energy. It's helping to calm the nervous system down, kind of help one be a little bit more of an even keel, and then helping to stimulate menses. And because it's nervine, it'll probably have a little bit of a spasmolytic action on the uterus. So it's classically used for painful menses, menstrual cramping, lack of bleeding, and kind of the stress and anxiety that can be associated during that time. So really, really useful remedy here. Like many of the artemisias, it does have a bit of a mild anthelmintic action, which means something that helps to dispel worms or parasites. It does have that property. It's not nearly as strong as its cousins, Artemisia absinthium, which is wormwood, or Artemisia annua, which is sweet Annie, which is its neighbor growing right next door there, Sweet Annie. We'll probably talk about Sweet Annie in a future post. But it does have a little bit of an anthelmintic property. But again, if I need an anthelmintic, I'll probably use something more like Sweet Annie or wormwood, but mugwort can be used in that way. as well. So these are some of the main actions associated with this plant. Now, energetically, whenever we see an aromatic bitter, it's kind of like, you know, bitters are typically cooling, aromatics are usually warming. So which one is it? Well, I always say it kind of depends on which of those flavors tends to dominate the plant. With mugwort, we see that the aromatic property tends to be a little bit more dominant. So we generally classify this as a warming plant. We see that in the way that it warms the uterus, it brings blood flow, it stimulates digestion, stimulates the nerves. It's kind of pushing things up and out, but the bitterness also drains things down and out. But the net temperature effect tends to be on the warming side. Naturally, because of all the fluids that it will drain, it tends to be drying. And then we'll see its effect on tissue tone is definitely going to be relaxant. There's not much of astringency or tonifying properties to mugwort. So yeah, warming, drying, relaxant, along with a bit of a stimulant property. So that's kind of what we see for its energetics. In that way, we will see its influence on the doshas of Ayurveda. It will tend to increase pitta because it is a warming plant. And again, with the Vata dosha, we see complexity because it's drying. That dryness can aggravate Vata a little bit, but it's like, what else is new? Like, that's like so many plants are drying. That's a thing that the Vata constitution is always having to figure out how to balance. And this is commonly why herbalists formulate herbs. But it does tend to, for the most part, I would say, decrease Vata because it's relaxant, it's nervine, it's antispasmodic, and because it's warming. So it's actually, I think, really, really great for the Vata dosha in that way. And in terms of the tissue states, we see this plant being really primarily used for the cold depression tissue state. So when tissues are slow and sluggish and needing that stimulation, as well as for the wind tension tissue state. This herb has a lot of really great psychological indications, and tension is absolutely one of them. I'll talk a little bit more about that after Whitney shares some of her experience about growing this herb, and getting into some more of those specific indications. But these are really the core properties of mugwort, looking at its taste, affinities, actions, and energetics. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the interesting psychological and spiritual and esoteric properties of this plant after Whitney shares her experience of growing it.
All right, so mugwort is also one of those herbs that was quite nostalgic to me, that I had a strong connection with when I first got into herbalism. It's just a really striking plant, the way that it makes you feel. And I think Seja will talk a little bit more about the psycho-spiritual kind of qualities of it. But it is native to North America and Europe and Asia, so it's a really widespread herb. What we have here in the garden is Artemisia vulgaris, which is a European variety and kind of the officially used often in Western herbalism variety. However, I would use really any mugworts interchangeably. We have in the Pacific Northwest an Artemisia suxdorfi, which is a beautiful coastal mugwort that's native here. There's a Artemisia douglasii, which kind of is up more in the mountains. So you'll find it in many different ecosystems, which I think speaks to its resiliency and just kind of its versatility as an herb, that you'll find it way up high in the mountains and right on the coast, right on the beach. And all of those mugworts I find are absolutely medicinal and interchangeable. And I know some herbalists might think otherwise, but I personally think they're all great. So this is easy to grow in the garden. It's really just vigorous and loves to take over and loves to grow. And I started these by seed, they're also easy plant to get started. So for medicine making, we would harvest the herb when it's starting to go. You want to use the aerial part, so the leaves are really the most medicinal part. And I would harvest it usually before it would get to this point. So this is really like full flower. I would harvest it when it's just maybe starting to go into flower, and most of the energy is going to be in the leaves. And it's really, there's so many different things you can do with this herb. So basic, we could make a tincture of it if we're going to use it for aromatic bitter tonic. This is really one of the best ways to take it, and for those uses would be in a tincture. Because of the volatile oils, again, I like to do a little bit higher percentage alcohol to capture all of the aromatic properties of the herb. So you could tincture it fresh, the leaves. The other things that you could do with it, you can dry the leaves and they can be used for, for a tea. It's so bitter, it's not really, no one's gonna really want to drink a tea of mugwort, but it can be used in herbal baths. So that could be used as a sitz bath, help to stimulate menses. It's used often in, you see it in like a Korean spa I've been to. They have big bath of mugwort and use it in steam rooms and stuff to just pour over your body, or to inhale the steam of the herb is really also wonderful, just incredible healing properties that it has that way, especially for female reproductive system as well, and balancing hormones and such. And then it has a long history of use as in Chinese medicine as moxibustion. So the leaves would be harvested and then they're kind of blended into, once the herb leaves are dried, blended into like fine wool, and then they would sift that to kind of take off the chafe of the leaves, and then burn that spun mugwort over specific acupuncture points to help stimulate circulation and stimulate blood flow and bring the chi and energy to those specific points. And if you don't, you're not an acupuncturist, so you don't do that yourself, you can still burn the herb and use moxibustion yourself to bring stimulation to certain areas of the body where there's stagnation. That would just be kind of gently holding the herb over the area and burning it. They make moxa boxes that you can use for that purpose, or you can buy compressed moxa sticks from Chinese medicine supply, and then those are just like sticks that you light and you'd kind of burn over the specific area, not touching your skin. You don't want to burn yourself, but just bringing the warmth and the heat of the herb burning is really therapeutic. So another use that I actually learned from Robin Rose Bennett, who's another incredible herbalist. She used this as a topical oil, so making an infused oil, an olive oil, or any other kind of carrier oil, and combining it with ginger as a topical oil to use over the pelvic area for menstrual cramps and pain, to help kind of relax and calm the muscles. And with the ginger as well, just bringing also that warmth and circulation to the pelvic area to help to disperse stagnation and help to kind of calm and relax and bring that blood flow to the area, which also will help to relieve the cramps. So I've also used this as just an infused mugwort oil kind of all over my body as kind of I would say almost like a ritualistic kind of thing that you can do to just also help to induce dreaming. And as this herb has that kind of dreamy quality, I feel like it helps to kind of open up your spirit to connect on that spiritual side, connect to that spiritual world and connect to that dreaming world. So you can use it that way to help to increase dreaming. And some people also you can make a little mugwort pillow with the dried leaves and make a little sachet with it and put it under your pillow to sleep with it, and just the smell and the presence of the herb also is relaxing, but it can stimulate dreaming, which I can't really take it or be around it in that way, because like Seja was mentioning earlier, I'll dream so much that I wake up feeling not rested. So for some people it might be too much, but this is an incredible herb that is just an absolute staple in Western materia, or just in general herbal materia medica, in many different parts of the world. It's been used as a medicine, and it's really easy to grow and easy to also find in many ecosystems. So wherever you live locally, you may have a local mugwort, native mugwort growing around you that you could find and get to know as well. All right, so as Seja had mentioned, the kind of correspondence to Artemis and the goddess of the hunt, that there's this archetypal quality to me as this feminine plant and an ally for women and people who have experienced trauma to the uterus. So one of the ways that I've used it as a bath and like a womb cleansing bath. So for people who have experienced rape or other sorts of deep trauma and to the pelvic region, one of the ways that I've used it is combining it with some other herbs like lady's mantle and rose and calendula, and just kind of making a whole womb cleansing and clearing bath. And just as another kind of ritual and a way to help to cleanse and clear and move any trauma and stagnation. So in so many ways we see this herb have these qualities of dispersing energy and moving circulation in the body, the way that Seja had expressed that. It's also used in many ways as kind of a smudge. So to dry the leaves and burn the leaves is also as a way to cleanse and clear just energetic stagnation and any negativity. And so in that way, it has that similar quality of just being able to clear and move and cleanse some stagnancy and stuck energy and things that someone might be going through, maybe emotionally or psychologically or spiritually, to just help to cleanse and move and reaching on those deeper subconscious levels, as far as in that way that it works on the dreams, way that it works deep into that kind of imaginal realm, that other part of us that maybe holds, maybe there's things back there, memories or traumas or things that we've gone through that are kind of haunt us, or nightmares or things like that. Mugwort will bring it all to the surface and kind of bring it up to into our awareness to process and help to clear and help to just move. So to me, it has been an ally in that way personally, just clearing and helping to move trauma. And I actually, when I first met this plant, when I first was getting into herbalism, I had so much trauma that was right beneath the surface and was so fresh and raw and intense. It was actually too much for me. And I had this aversion to this plant because I could feel it starting to bring things up. And it was a lot to handle. But then I found the plant was actually trying to teach me something and show me something, and it became an ally to help to slowly move through and process and to release the trauma that I had been holding. So it's an incredible ally. I feel like this plant is really profound and powerful healer.
So one of the things about mugwort that I have always really loved about this plant is that it has a really strong effect on our psyche. And I think, part of that is because it stimulates dreaming so much, but there's also an aspect of the way in which the plant influences the mind and what type of person that it's really, really good for. That is just something I really like. And probably because it's like really good for me. This is a plant that I really have liked a lot over the years and found it to be really beneficial. So one of the things about kind of some of the specific indications of this plant is that it is really, really good for people that are extremely sensitive, like people that they tend to be really kind of dreamy and in the other world and kind of have a hard time being present all the way because they're kind of on the other side. It's like they kind of have a foot in both worlds, but sometimes the foot maybe leans a little bit more towards the other world, right? These are people that have really active imaginations, really active dream worlds, really active kind of maybe psychic abilities or hypersensitive. One key indication for mugwort is people that have like certain senses are really, really heightened. So there can be like excessive sensitivity to sunlight. Like in bright days, they're the people that always like want to wear sunglasses. They can have really sensitive hearing. So it's like their sensory gating channels are just maybe a little too open, and that kind of makes them hypersensitive to things, and then things kind of affect them really intensely. So the mugwort person is really, really overly sensitive, basically, both to kind of invisible, subtle influences, but also just emotionally tend to be sensitive. And that's one of the main kind of psychological indications. Now, generally speaking, this herb is, classically considered a women's remedy, right? Paracelsus said, what is Venus other than the mugwort growing in your garden? And I always really loved that quote. And when he says Venus, he's really speaking to the action of this plant on the whole female reproductive system, and the way it is so specific for menses and for reproductive health, and just in general as a women's remedy. As Whitney was talking about, this plant is so good for healing trauma, especially traumas associated with the reproductive system, the whole pelvic region, and the sensitivity and kind of withdrawnness that can happen due to traumas and things like that. And again, it's that cleansing. It's like cleansing and clearing those old traumas and those old patterns. So it's really, really incredible in that way. So astrologically speaking, for a really long time, I considered this plant to be ruled by the moon. And, oftentimes that's because, as you can see, it's got that kind of lunar silvery coloration to it. The undersides of the leaves have that kind of white, creamy, silvery color. And just the whole way that it influences dreaming and sleeping, and kind of those subtle realms, I guess, trying not to sound too woo-woo about it, but the way it kind of carries us into that visionary world in a way, is a very lunar kind of property. So I've always really thought of this as a lunar plant, thinking of it on that level. But when I'm really thinking about the medicinal virtues, like the way we use it physically as a medicine, Venus does make a lot of sense. The way it is antispasmodic, the way it's relaxing and calming the nervous system, the way it's a menagogue, its whole action on the reproductive system, as well as hormones. And I forgot to mention that earlier, is that some of the more phytotherapist-oriented herbalists do say that Artemisia stimulates the higher regulatory centers in the brain, in terms of things like follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So it is hitting those higher regulatory centers in the brain in association with kind of the whole female anatomical endocrine cascade, right? And that actually leads to another specific indication that Matthew Wood talks about, which is hyperandrogenism, which is an excess of androgen hormones. So it can be really specific for folks that have heightened levels of testosterone in comparison to like estrogen and progesterone. So that's one of the really key specific indications for the use of this plant. But anyways, that all kind of, again, relates back to Venus, right? Because Venus is governing those, that female anatomical endocrine cascade, and it's using for balancing an excess of the male anatomical endocrine cascade, being more heightened testosterone. So again, it's like Venus balancing Mars. So Venus to me makes a whole lot of sense for this herb. Elementally speaking, I really think of it as an air element plant for sure. The way that it is working through the mind, the way it's working through the nervous system, the way it's relaxing wind and tension and spasm, the way it's dispersing energy and moving stuck energy. It's like that wind kind of element moving and dispersing things. And as you can see, it's just the way this plant kind of spreads out, it starts out kind of low and bushy, and then when it hits the flowering phase, it's just like boom, and it shoots up and out, and it sends out all these small stems, and it just kind of reaches outwards like that into the air. It gets pretty tall. I mean, clearly I'm not super tall, but it's taller than me. So yeah, I really think about the air element for this herb. And then I also see it having kind of a cardinal quality to it, or what we might refer to as the sulfur principle in alchemy. As Whitney and I was saying earlier, it's very rich in volatile essential oils. You can distill oil from mugwort. It's very rich in oils. The sulfur principle rules essential oils in the alchemical tradition. And that's kind of pitta in quality, so that's where we get the warmth, the stimulation, and the movement dynamic of this plant. Plus, it's like an herb that we burn, as Whitney was talking about moxibustion, and the way it's used in that way to kind of clear and cleanse stagnant energy, and the burning kind of quality is very kind of sulfury in nature when we're thinking of it in terms of the alchemical principles. So that's the way I tend to think of this plant, as Venus, air, and cardinal. I also do kind of think of it as a lunar ruled plant as well. If I'm working with this herb spagirically, if I was wanting to bring out more of the physical properties, I would work with it under Venus. If I was wanting to bring out maybe more of its esoteric virtues in the way it works with dreams and sleep and otherworldliness, then I would consider working with it more under the moon if I wanted to draw that property out in my spagiric preparation. So, boy, there's a lot to be said about Artemisia vulgaris. What a wonderful plant, and hopefully you learned something good about it in this video. Thanks so much for joining us here for this episode of our plant profile kind of series we've been doing on the blog here out in the garden. So if you haven't done so yet, head on over to our website at evolutionaryherbalism.com to check out more free posts, free training, free mini courses, lots of free stuff over there. We really like to give away a lot to the herbal community. Check out our podcast at The Plant Path, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook for all the daily updates and all of that. And until the next one, take care and be well.